Russian soldiers going home.
Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic Sunday night. I hope that everyone has had a wonderful weekend. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I hope you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's a ton of stuff that has happened over the last 24 hours throughout the entire world. And there is plenty to talk about, whether or not you're talking about Ukraine or other locations throughout the world. Libya, I know right now is a very hot topic. Ethiopia too. And of course, everyone's pretty interested in what's ongoing in and around Taiwan with the situation between Taiwan and China. But there has been a ton of stuff that's happening, but most of it, as usual, is not usually good. The stuff that gets the news, generally speaking, is usually pretty terrible crises and tragedies and stuff that's happening like that all over the world. But luckily, you guys have built an awesome community and allow us to be the news that gives back. I mean, we are here to support nothing but organizations that help people throughout the world. That is the main goal of the channel. On top of just delivering news to you in kind of a different format, we want to be able to help people that are affected directly by the crises that we talk about every day here on the channel. So please be sure to check out the video description below. We're never doing super chats and we're never pushing any kind of merchandising. Everything is to support those organizations. And when we get up to the point that we can, we're going to have actually donations and fundraisers on these streams, every single one of them, so that way you guys can fundraise live with us, and we hope to raise over $1 million with that, and that's kind of a far future goal for us now. Hopefully we are able to kind of push that, closer and closer. But if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's fine too. Help us grow. The more people that are here on the channel and the more people that participate, the more of an impact we will have as a community. And so please, if you can't give a lot or a little, at least help us grow by subscribing to us, liking us, sharing us on social media, telling your friends about us, because overall, the more people are here, the more good we can do throughout the world and help people that are, affected by these crises. So thank you very much, though, for the support that you've already given us. I really cannot say enough about the support we've gotten, and I really can't say enough when it comes to the support, even more so, that the organizations below have gotten, because you guys have been amazing in those endeavors, and hopefully we will continue this into the long and prosperous future. And with that, we're going to go ahead and start moving directly into the news. There is before we do, please make sure that you are asking questions and making comments. The reason being is I understand that a lot of these situations are a little bit kind of complicated, especially not everyone has a military background. Not everyone has a background in a lot of things. And so I served in the United States Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I was an 0352 anti-tank missileman, which is an infantryman, and I did 2 tours. My first tour was to Syria. My second tour, I spent time in Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. So I spent quite a bit of time there, and so I have a little bit of real-world experience when it comes to especially the conflicts in this area, and I am a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armor doctrine. Everything else, I'll try to give my best answers possible, but I also highly encourage you to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt and also do your own research too. Don't believe everything said on the internet, folks. But with that, we're going to go ahead and move right into the news, starting, of course, with our special report in Ukraine. And, of course, we start up here in the northern part of Ukraine, near Kyiv, where we have 2 different developments. The first one, of course, is the child casualty update, which we normally are getting from the Prosecutor General's office, as well as the Ukrainian Commissioner for Human Rights. And today, what was said is, quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 379 Ukrainian children have died, 733 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk Oblast. Once again, that's coming from the Prosecutor General's office. This war has taken a toll on many civilians, and of course, children are highly affected as well. Millions of children have had to flee the country of Ukraine and are currently going through, as it is now school time, going into schools in foreign countries where they have found refuge. At this point, about 2/3 of Ukrainian children have fled, but unfortunately in areas such as Donetsk, where families have decided to remain, the Donetsk region is where a significant portion of the fighting is taking place, and the most severe fighting at that. And so that's kind of what we've been seeing. That does not also include, and I'm sure those estimates, as the UN have pointed out, are usually very low, as information is very limited coming out of occupied areas. However, this is not all thing, but all things considered, there is kind of good news, and that is that, quote, as of August 28th, Ukraine has returned the bodies of another 541 dead Ukrainian servicemen in a body repatriation, and that is coming from the press service of the Ministry of Reintegration and Temporary Occupied Territories. So they were able to return the bodies of 541 dead Ukrainian servicemen back home to be able to be laid to rest and give those families some closure. We kind of skip over Kharkiv today. It doesn't seem like any major developments outside of the baseline, which is general shelling in this area that hasn't even really been heavily reported on. But there have been, there hasn't been a major updates regarding Kharkiv or Izium, but we immediately start to roll into areas in the Luhansk where we see several different things happening. First of all, a pretty large Russian military base was reportedly struck at Svatove, and this is within the Luhansk Oblast. The Russians reportedly, the remaining personnel that weren't killed or injured, reportedly ended up evacuating that facility entirely, and we do have a little bit of footage coming from that as well. So you can see some of the images here. Obviously, some pretty good devastation there from these Ukrainian strikes, well within Ukrainian ability to strike these locations. You can see these are obviously pretty destroyed. Another update we have is coming out of Severodonetsk. Now, information is very limited about what's happening and what it's like behind the lines inside of Russian-occupied territory. Much like Mariupol, Severodonetsk and Rubizhne and the surrounding area suffered tremendously when it came to the level of destruction and ferocity of Russian bombardments here. Russian bombardments, generally speaking, are not precision strikes. They use the BM-21 Grad system, which is a multi-rocket launch system, MLRS if you will, but it's not like the HIMARS. These are not precision. They are 122 millimeter Katyusha dumbfire rockets that are fired in 40-round salvos. They land in a general area or a beaten zone where they destroy everything within that area. They fill it with fire and shrapnel. It is quite literally just it's an area suppression weapon. It's a area denial. It is there for nothing more than saturation of an area with high explosive power. And that's what we saw used quite extensively against Severodonetsk, Mariupol, and of course Rubizhne throughout the early part of the Donbass campaign. Here in Severodonetsk, that level of destruction is quite significant. It's extremely significant, or it is extremely significant. The destruction here in Severodonetsk is by pretty much probably unrivaled with the exception of about Mariupol. Think of Severodonetsk and you kind of can bring back comparisons from World War II of areas such as Stalingrad. It has pretty much completely been destroyed, and the residents here are not getting an immense amount of support. Something that we have noticed is that in Russian occupational areas, while they are denying international committees to enter into these areas, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, as well as the United Nations are being refused of being let in through the lines, they are bringing in supplies, but it is quite minimal. And what we see here is that in Severodonetsk, what food is coming in as food, water, and shelter and work are pretty much non-existent in the city. There are hours-long waits in lines and queues just to get a measly bit of food from the Russians. And as we have seen before, usually the food that is brought to them is molded over and is pretty much unconsumable by human beings. So we can go ahead and take a look. This is some of the long wait lines here in Severodonetsk.
Очередь за обедом. По Новикова. Кафе. И телефоны заряжают.
Once again, the level of destruction within these areas is really unprecedented since World War II. It's insane to think about. As I've said time and time before, I went through some areas I thought I had seen the worst of it. When I was in Syria, I remember there were entire villages with everything but the moss was completely flattened into the ground. And I thought, wow, modern warfare is crazy. Like the fact that we are able to do these things and this amount of destruction so easily as human beings, it was hard to bring your mind around it. And then this war, if if there are other people, other veterans watching this watching this news stream, a lot of people said, well, it was pretty similar to kind of what we did. It's not. Remember, as a viewer, you see about 10 to 25% of the stuff we're looking through every single day. A lot of it's pretty graphic. A lot of it is stuff that really doesn't have any location, isn't verifiable in some kind of a way, cross-referenced. It's not geolocated or anything. And so it really gets cut down quite a significant amount, especially on the part of the gore and the death and destruction. This ferocity of this war is something that cannot be compared to. There's no amount of time that you spent in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. It doesn't matter where you spent time. If you spent time in Africa, it really doesn't matter. This war is completely different. When they say that this is the worst war since the end of World War II, it is quite true. It's not like Yugoslavia, where it was really a civil war and a war of territories between nations that were all once part of a nation, Yugoslavia. But it's instead two industrial first world powers killing each other with the entire strength of their economy behind them. Something that hasn't been seen in decades. It hasn't been seen since World War II. It's not an overwhelming superpower versus a regional power. It is two countries of essentially equal strength killing each other in what has become a war of attrition. As we move into as we continue to kind of roll our way over here into the Donetsk Oblast, we get that Slavyansk is receiving quite an extensive amount of shelling. Slavyansk lies along what is suspected to be a Russian line of advance or an axis of advance for the Russian Federation, while their attacks near Soledar and Bakhmut have relatively bogged down, and there seems to be little gain outside of their first day. We haven't seen any ground push here in the Slavyansk and Kramatorsk area. And that doesn't mean it isn't coming. We still see quite an extensive amount of precursor bombardment within these regions. Slavyansk is quite a bit larger than Bakhmut and Soledar in this region, and it lies along a strategic axis of advance for the Russians to take in order to take Kramatorsk. To take Kramatorsk, the Russians must take Slavyansk. There is no other way around it unless they march their armies clear through the south. Kramatorsk is a strategically vital area for the Russian Federation and within this region. The reason why is because many main roads that supply the areas of defense here within the Donbass have to run through Kramatorsk. Secondly, there's a major railhead within Kramatorsk, as you may remember, from when Kramatorsk was hit and roughly 50 plus civilians were killed, with many more injured at the train platforms there in Kramatorsk. It's a very central location here within the Donetsk region, making it a perfect kind of command and control center. And all of this kind of factors into the point of it needs to be taken by the Russians, and the fastest way to do that is to take their troops, take Slavyansk, and then move on to Kramatorsk, and basically put pressure on the military and logistical capability of the Ukrainian forces. It also allows for a wide encirclement movement as the troops here in the south are pushing up north, and the troops from the north are pushing southward, and you can encircle the Ukrainian defenses here in the south, or here in the kind of southeast part of the Donetsk Oblast, which would be several thousand Ukrainian forces here within this region. But we do see quite a significant amount of bombardment here in Slavyansk. At this point, while shelling did strike residential parts of the city, there were no reports of any kind of civilian casualties, whether that be dead or injured, which is very good to hear. And go ahead and take a look. Once again, just kind of I wouldn't say it's pointless shelling on the part of the Russians here, but you shouldn't be shelling civilian infrastructure. While the Geneva Convention does allow for some kinds of collateral damage and unfortunately even collateral deaths, the fact of the matter is that the Russian Federation have pretty much thrown that out the window. Instead of using the Geneva Convention as a kind of, this is what you can and cannot do, right? This is what you cannot do. Like, these things should not happen. Instead, the Russian Federation appears to be using it like a checklist. Like, once again, this is a war of attrition. It's a meat grinder, essentially, and they are absolutely just terrorizing the civilian population and just bombarding entire civilian populations into non-existence. Mariupol, 90% of the city of Mariupol has been completely destroyed. Whatever is still left standing and hasn't collapsed on its own must be demolished and completely rebuilt. The city is utterly destroyed. There is no help there. There is no kind of health infrastructure. There's no basic infrastructure. There's barely any food. And these areas, the entire Donetsk region, the entire Donbass, and the entirety of Ukraine has suffered quite immensely under this scorched earth policy that the Russians seem to have implemented. It's not the fact that the Russians are being ordered to do this. It's the fact that there's a lack of them to be ordered not to. And that seems to be the issue, is a lack of any kinds of rules of engagement for Russian forces, which we saw rather early on during the beginning parts of the war. Of course, that also leads us to the daily Donetsk update. This comes from Pavel Krylenko, who's the head of the regional military administration here within Donetsk. And he said he gives us an update every day, 24 hours after the fact, where he kind of tells us what happened the day before, entirety within his region. And he says that today, quote, Russian aggressors fired missiles at the Donetsk region on August the 27th. One person was killed and 2 citizens were injured. Of course, that brings us to our main talking point of the day. And while there have been several big developments throughout the entirety of the day, this one was a shocker. Not entirely, but it definitely was quite significant. Talking about the level of destruction and the ferocity of Russian bombardment is probably no better stated when you're talking about Mariupol. But here we have great visual indicators as well as the city of Marinka, which is just to the southwest of the main city of Donetsk. It puts a lot of pressure on the Russians' left flank. And what we see here, and at least for this city, is that Marinka does not exist as a city. It is not habitable. It has been wiped off the face of the earth, and the shelling continues. The mass saturation bombardments from Grad systems and large batteries of self-propelled guns and towed artillery have turned this into a hellscape. There is nothing left. There is nothing to return to. There is no Ukrainian that will be returning home, as there is no home. Here in Marinka, it has all been destroyed, and today the Russian Federation appears to have been able to give us what appears to be a drone footage video to show us quite the extent of this damage. Take a look. And so as you can see here, the just extent of this damage, this entire city has been completely leveled. These are homes. These are residential areas. Okay, this is not a Russian-held city either. This is Ukrainian-held. And you can see what I mean by saturation bombardment. Precision strike, generally speaking, even if it wasn't a massive artillery barrage, right? I would put, if I had a target in this area, I'd put and I had to strike in a civilian area, I would put an artillery round here in this open field, right? In between these houses. It'd screw up these houses and these houses alone. As you can see here, the massive amount of fire in completely destroyed areas behind it, that is a saturation bombardment. That is a BM-21 Grand system that has unleashed a 40-round salvo and has landed all 40 rounds in an area of about a square kilometer. You don't live through that. Nothing survives through that. You're hiding in your basement. It is completely destroyed. It is completely destroyed. Oh, it would appear that my web camera has decided it wanted to flip. But yes, the entirety of that has been essentially destroyed. It is horrendous what has happened here. But as we continue on, Artemis Shank says, I hope that the folks have evacuated. Unfortunately, when it comes to this area, a lot of people didn't evacuate. The issue is that inside of this region, inside of where this fighting is ongoing, the issue is that many people refuse to evacuate. Unfortunately, within this region, a lot of people appear to have not evacuated. As it would appear, the entirety of the Russian Federation appears to have completely just destroyed this area. And the people that were living here thought that what was going to happen was that they were... How do I say this? They were... they'd already lived through it. This war has been ongoing for quite some time. These people have been fighting for quite some time in this area, and it just... It's just hard to describe. They thought they had lived through it already. They thought they knew that what they were going through, and they weren't. They had no idea. So, that's the kind of situation here. And as we continue on, we end up going over here. This is in the southern part. This is somewhere here located in the Donbass, where, quote, the armed forces of Ukraine shot down a Russian UAV on August the 28th. That's coming from the press service of the Air Command Center. And we actually see a photo of this UAV. This is an Orlan 10 drone that was shot down. This is coming from the General Staff of Ukraine. This is their official Twitter, and they have showed us the destroyed Orlan 10 that they said they had shot down earlier this morning. So, another Orlan 10 down for the count. The usage of drones is quite heavy inside of this conflict. It's kind of unprecedented in its scale. While we've seen drones, especially quadcopters, used quite heavily within the Middle East against coalition forces, it's really this level of drone warfare, especially smaller portable drones, really has not been industrialized to this scale up until now. It really is something completely different. The United States and coalition partners were definitely talking about implementing some of these things earlier on, but what ended up happening, is, they said, okay, we're going to do this by 2030, but it was quite unsure as to just how effective it would be. Well, we've seen the effectiveness at drones, and this war is going to be analyzed quite heavily for their usage and implementation, the issues of what they dealt with, their problems that they had to overcome, where they lack, where the advantages are, where the disadvantages are, and overall, it's going to be quite talked about. The Orlan 10 drone obviously is not as effective and is not as intricate as initially believed, and that comes on as well as most of the Russian forces and most of their equipment. And so we kind of continue down here. This is in Melitopol. Look at here in Melitopol, what we end up seeing is that the Russian Federation, what we see is that the Russian Federation has lost a large base reportedly. So according to Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol, quote, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed one of the biggest military bases of the Russian occupiers in Melitopol in the Zaporizhzhia region. We're unsure as to just how true that is. We haven't seen any footage coming out of this area yet. However, it wouldn't be surprising if over the next 12 to 72 hours we end up getting a lot of stuff. By the way, I apologize, folks. I was having some technical difficulties. My webcam has flipped, and it apparently also was recording audio despite not having the setting for it. So it happens. It is what it is. We're doing it live, folks. But Melitopol, there isn't any footage coming out of this. So while we do have the quote from Ivan Fedorov, which is a pretty reliable source, being the mayor of Melitopol, we are not quite sure, just quite the extent of the damage. We do know that there is quite a large base here in Melitopol. We do know that this airfield is quite significant for the Russians. It plays quite a bit of part, pretty large part on at least their helicopter operations within this region, as well as some minor air, as well as being a staging base, command and control hub, logistical hub for them. But after that, we really don't understand quite the extent of the damage, and we'll hopefully get more footage of that over the next anywhere from 12 to 72 hours. As you jump up here to Enhadar, we see that Enhadar has been struck by shelling. It is unclear which side has shelled Enhadar, but it appears to have kind of the telltale signs that it may be the Russian Federation. The reason we can say this is based off of the prior tactics of the Ukrainians. We just don't see this type of shelling. We don't see this type of targeting and inaccuracy in their targeting. What we usually are going to be seeing, especially with the hot topic of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, it would not work in Ukraine's favor to have shelled this location to begin with, at least on a maintaining the moral high ground standpoint, if you will. It's not an advantageous narrative to have stated so and to have done so. The Russian Federation has reportedly been and with some pretty good confirmation, have been shelling their own power plant. It's quite possible they shelled the city as well, as there are going to be expected visits by the International Atomic Energy Administration coming here in roughly a week is when they are set to actually arrive and take a look at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. At this point, the extent of the damage to casualties is unknown, but we do have some video footage coming out of this for you. And so what we are hearing here were some impacts located in and around here. But we now have up close and personal footage of the devastation. Just take a look. So what we have here, obviously you can see where those impacts have occurred, and there's several videos here as well. Once again, we do not know who shelled who here at this point, but what we do know is that Enhadar did receive some shelling, and obviously we do not know what the casualties are at this point. We jump across the river here into Nikopol, which is located in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and what we see is that shelling has occurred in Nikopol. Unfortunately, one woman is dead. A 67-year-old woman was killed in the shelling, as well as four other individuals were injured. This is after Russian shelling ended up striking residential areas. And you can see some of the destruction there. And that allows us to move over here into the Kherson and Mykolaiv Oblast. Now, reportedly, Novokhovka has had some excitement today after a Russian headquarters was reportedly struck by Ukrainian forces, destroying said headquarters. We don't know of any casualties or the direct location of this, but we do know it located inside of Novokhovka. It makes sense. Novokhovka is kind of a strategic point. It's a very vital crossing point for the Russians, and is really their last remaining major supply line route, at least on the ground, between the southern part of the Kherson Oblast into the northern part of the Kherson Oblast. Novokhovka has received quite a significant amount of shelling over the last few weeks, and we continue to see that now. This would serve as a command and control center for any Russian forces, as well as the facilitation of any logistical supplies and reinforcements moving into the north.
Сейчас выключу, да. Короче, завода «Сокола» нету, все. Осталось одно здание и чуть-чуть соняшника. Все, внутри все точечно разбомбили. Ничего не осталось. И прилетело 5 снарядов. Веселимся мы. Так что вот так вот, ребята.
And so, after yet another intense shelling there in Novokhovka, it wouldn't appear to be the only thing. Counter battery done right is how I titled this, and that's because, quote, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed a Russian 152mm self-propelled howitzer, a 2A-65 Mista B, a 120mm self-propelled mortar system, the 2S9 Nona S, and 2 enemy ammunition depots and 1 field station in the settlements of Duchany, Davidov, Brod, and Voskreneski in the Kherson and Mykolaiv regions on August the 27th. That's coming from Operational Command South. So once again, here in the Kherson region, there's been quite a significant amount of advantageous targets that the Ukrainians have successfully destroyed over the last few days. And that allows us to jump to our last point here inside the country of Ukraine, and that is just south of Sevastopol here on the coast. What we have been able to do is we've actually been able to geolocate this as the wonderful internet community has been able to. And the thing is that it would appear that more explosions have occurred here in Crimea. This time it would appear that a coastal radar site as well as an anti-air defense system site located here on the coast was destroyed. We're not quite sure of whether or not this is an accident or a Ukrainian strike. However, it would appear that it may have been a Ukrainian strike based off of the accuracy and the importance of the target. We can go ahead and take a look at some of this here. You can see everything burning there on the coast, on the tip of the coast.
Что-то горит в лесу над Семиизом.
There's a little bit closer look at that fire for y'all. And they actually have some footage of this area and the sites located here. So this is the area that has been geolocated. Reportedly, according to OSINT Technical, it was an S-400 battery that was manned by the 12th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment of the Russian Federation. Makes sense. These coastal defenses are rather important. You can see the entire radar site located here inside of some earthworks. And once again, here's some of the geolocation process that these people have jumped through. And it is quite impressive to take a look at this. They first identify the sight line of where this photo was taken. They identify the sight line, they identify the key features in the sight line, and they can basically go on Google Maps and other footage that's available on the internet, and they're able to relocate kind of where this is taking place. So quite impressive feats by the communities there on the internet. I can imagine. JL says, is it okay? So there's been some talk in the chat actually regarding the Artemis One mission. I am extremely excited for the Artemis One mission, by the way. There's a lot of very fascinating things currently going on with that. It's a test, technically. So JL asked a question. He says, is it a test or an actual mission? It's an actual mission, but it's also a test. It is the test of the Artemis One rocket. It will fly around the moon and come back. It is unmanned. And then they will have a flyby of the moon on Artemis 2 with an official moon landing, the first humans to land on the moon since the end of the Apollo missions there on the moon on Artemis 3. So that is what's ongoing with that. It's a fly around, it's unmanned, but they will test everything on the system and on the rocket pod to make sure it works remotely. But other than that, that is everything inside of Ukraine for those that are here for that. There's quite a bit of information inside of Ukraine, but there's also quite a bit of information outside of Ukraine, as unfortunately the world does continue to turn. There's a lot of other stuff going on in the world and a lot of other crises, unfortunately. But don't worry, there's other news in regards to Ukraine outside of the country. And the first thing that we end up stopping off here is in Russia, and this is at Vorozhne, which is here in Vorozhne. This has also been geolocated, and more Russian equipment has been spotted on its way there. Specifically, some interesting equipment to note. MTLBs, which are an armored personnel carrier, a little bit of an older variant, but highly utilized by the Russian forces throughout this war. This rail line specifically will head in two directions. One of them is going to be headed over to the Luhansk Oblast, where we can kind of guess and say this is where the Russians are likely headed here. But the most interesting system that we see is a Buk missile system. Buk missile system is an anti-air defense system, and it has different types of ordnance on board, I believe. I don't know a whole lot about it, as it's not within my area of expertise, but my understanding is that a Buk missile system is actually what ended up shooting down the Malaysian Airlines flight inside of Ukraine back in 2014. So we are able to kind of see what this looks like. I mean, I can actually have some video footage of it being brought in on a flatbed train car here in Vorozhne as it's headed to the front. Russia is pouring a ton of troops and equipment into this war, almost an unfathomable amount of material. And it is quite an impressive sight to see whenever we see just all of these train cars. And we got to understand that when we're seeing the footage of these trains running through, it's nothing but a mere fraction of what truly is coming through every single day, going through Russia and into Ukraine. The amount of men and materials and equipment that is being brought into this war is quite unprecedented in its scale, with the exception of maybe the World Wars. It is insane to think about the amount of stuff being pulled from stockpiles and across the entirety of Russia to be brought on flatbed train cars to fight in Ukraine. Now, while they are bringing in quite an amount of equipment, the issue is manpower. They have run quite dangerously low on manpower. In fact, they have been fighting with what is essentially combat ineffective units for the last several months. Russia at this point is having issues filling that and has increased their recruitment drives throughout the entirety of Russia, including forced conscriptions in areas that they occupy, such as the Donetsk and the Luhansk Oblasts. However, not only do you need the equipment, but you need the men to crew that equipment, and many of these are going to be very untrained if they receive any training at all, and would be probably better served as riflemen. But that's not it. We continue our tour of Europe here with a couple of different things. The first one is a little bit of interesting news that's ongoing here, and a little bit of a tragic news. 6 are dead after a truck drove into a neighborhood barbecue here in the Netherlands. The death toll of an accident when a truck drove off the road and slammed into a community barbecue rose to 6 Sunday, and police said that a further 7 people are currently in the hospital, including one which is in critical condition. Police spokeswoman Miriam Boer said that the truck driver, 46-year-old Spanish man, is suspected of causing the accident that happened early on Saturday evening in the village of New Bijgeland. His identity was not released in line with Dutch privacy laws, and Boer said the driver was not under the influence of alcohol at the time of the crash. Well, you can see the crash site there. And as we continue on up into the UK, we once again get back into kind of the Ukrainian stuff. And that is because the troops that are being trained in the United Kingdom, it's a NATO-led training course. It's expedited, and this is training brand new, fresh recruits from Ukraine on basic skills that they will need to operate effectively in the field. And these troops, according to the press service, has released some photos. It would appear that through these photos that we can see that the Ukrainians have moved on from the basic skills, and they're now doing much more complex training regimens. They're doing much more complex, building, clearing, military operations, squad level attacks, small unit, kind of small unit mentality stuff. And it's great to see that the basic infantry need that. That makes them very effective. Everything is scaled in the military, not just unit sizes, but unit capabilities. The basic stuff that you can learn, buddy rushing or bounding, depending on what you call it. 2 people, one person laying down suppression, the other person is moving up towards the enemy, closing with to destroy the enemy. And that can get included, 2 halves of a fire team, 2 fire teams, 2 squads, 2 companies, or 2 platoons, 2 companies, 2 regiments, 2 battalions. That gets scaled up. Just like everything else, it can be scaled up. The very small things that you're taught can happen in quite large scales if you apply them correctly. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing them get into this more complex stuff that's going to make them not just that's going to make them more efficient and therefore deadlier on the battlefield. Take a look. And quite an impressive photo shoot. It would appear that these troops are learning how to use the British service rifle, the L85, which is very interesting to see. I wonder if they're going to be given these after their training is over. You can see they've already they're operating with anti-armor teams as well. And pretty awesome to see. We have even more here. Of course, the AK, very, very effective weapon, most common weapon that you're going to be finding there on the battlefield, whether it's the AK-47, AK-74, AKM, and later variants, AK-109, I think is what it is. You see, this is them here. This is them clearing a building. It looks like they moved on to much more complex buildings, such as 2-story buildings, multiple rooms, multiple structures. And this can get very complicated very quickly. It is a very difficult skill to learn, let alone master, but it is something that can be done. And this is something that infantrymen do quite a lot of training on, because this is probably the deadliest type of warfare you can ever do. Military operations in urban terrain is the deadliest military operation, aside from, I would say, an amphibious landing that one can do. And you're seeing that they're learning how to use all this stuff in conjunction with multiple types of tools that they may have available to them, such as ladders, which is stuff that you would normally not be just carrying if you're out on patrol. So that means that they've probably moved past that. And you can see that they're starting to get much more comfortable with what they're doing, and they're much more comfortable in how they're going to be operating. We should see, while they lack military experience there on the battlefield, they do clearly understand that as soon as they get done with this, they will be rotated home, and they will then be on the battlefield. Their training will come into amazing use, and that training will eventually be coupled with battlefield experience, which makes someone extremely, extremely effective and therefore very deadly on the battlefield. This is something the Russians have not come up against and will, unfortunately for them, be facing relatively soon. And that finally brings us down here and into the Middle East, where we have a major development coming out of Syria. 27 people were detained during a Syrian counter-terrorism operation. This is happening at the Halal camp, the Al-Al camp here in northeastern Syria. Fighters of the Syrian Democratic Forces detained 27 people. They're suspected of committing crimes on behalf of the Islamic State. The security forces demolished more than 30 tents, which prisoners used for Sharia courts and teaching children the ideology of the MTO. During their search, one of them, the SDS fighters, found the uniform of Turkish armed forces, which is quite concerning if true. But as you can see here, actually, I'm going to go back out of this, and we're actually going to open this in Telegram. Move this over for y'all. And so as you can see here, the Turkish uniform here with the Turkish flag on the shoulder patch. Go ahead and remove that. So this is the CTO, or the counterterrorism operation by the Syrian Democratic Forces. They made a promo video out of it. Pretty much everyone in the world will do that at some point. Now, the SDF are pretty interesting individuals. I spent quite a bit of time with them. I spent 4.5 months with them. When I was in Syria, now, what ends up happening is we were actually, in and around the Syrian Democratic Forces, and they are extremely good at fighting the Islamic State, though they do take quite significant casualties doing so. Go ahead and take a look at this one. So these guys appear to be a couple of different groups, to tell you. So there's about 6 different groups inside of the SDF, or the Syrian Democratic Forces. Some of them are Arab, some of them are not. This would appear, I believe that is an Arab one. Let's see if I can get a better look at there. No, actually it's not. So you have YPG fighters here, a couple of them. And you also have YPJ. That's actually what... So YPG is males. YPJ is females. As you can see, she's in a uniform here. But they have all sorts... These guys are a lot better equipped than I remember ours being. So that's quite a significant... It's very interesting to see, as I have not seen the SDF in quite some time. But it's very cool to see them going out and conducting counterterrorism operations. This is definitely within their kind of bounds of where they're operating at. This is kind of, this entire region is really the, Deir ez-Zor, Al-Hasaka provinces are really quite significantly where the SDF are located, and they're conducting a lot of operations here, especially counter-ISIS stuff. They hate ISIS. They really hate Daesh. They hate Daesh. But we move on from this point, and we go ahead and we jump over here once again into Pakistan and Afghanistan. Pakistan and Afghanistan have been suffering under immense flooding for about the last month or so, and we continue to see that today as even more footage of this flooding has occurred up here within the tribal regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan, really up by the areas of, say, Swat, which is up here in the north, kind of or northwestern part of the country of Pakistan. More than 1,000 people were victims of the flood at this point, with another 1,527 being injured by this. By the data provided by the National Disaster Management Agency has said that in addition, the elements all destroyed almost 3.5 thousand kilometers of road, 149 buildings, or 149 bridges, and about 1,000 homes in total. Finally getting some of those official figures. Much like we saw yesterday, we have even more flooding coming in for today.
Vamos, Sirigaba.
استغفر الله استغفر الله استغفر الله الله اكبر بدل غفر عايز يشيل الرجال كايس يسوي يشيل الرجال استغفر الله استغفر الله.
Once again, you do not win against Mother Nature, and unfortunately that appears to be the case here in Afghanistan and Pakistan. From Afghanistan, no official figures have come out. However, the Taliban do have consolidated most of their holdings here in Afghanistan, and it's very unlikely that we'll get any official numbers. Jump over here and into China, where it would appear that China's Poyang Lake is drying up amid a heat wave. As many other places within the world, heat waves and extreme weather due to climate change have really caused significant issues, especially when it comes onto the terms of drought. As we see here, Poyang has dried up by 70%. This is China's largest freshwater lake. The water level was the lowest on record since 1951. Changes are associated with abnormal heat and decrease in water flow. We can take a look at some of this here. And as you can see, quite the significant drop in water levels here. And it's only continually getting worse here. So, once again, another location that has been highly affected by drought and issues with water. Down here in the Taiwan Strait, which is located between Taiwan and China, 2 U.S. cruisers sailed through the Taiwan Strait. The U.S. Navy ships entered the Taiwan Strait. The guided missile cruiser USS Antietam and the USS Chancellorsville made the trip of the U.S. 7th Fleet out of Japan. I believe that's out of Yokosuka, sorry. In the statement, they had made that no interference from foreign military forces. The Chinese military's Eastern Theater Command said that it was monitoring the treaty ships and remaining on high alert and ready to thwart any provocation. Good luck with that. And that allows us to jump down here and into Africa, where we have a couple of different developments. First of all, coming out of Somalia, Al-Shabaab, which is an Al-Qaeda-linked militant organization and terrorist group, has said that they were threatening to invade Kenya. The Somali group Al-Shabaab has released a new statement in English threatening Kenya with an invasion in retaliation for the killing of Muslims if newly elected Kenyan President William Ruto changes his policy towards Somalia and withdraws his troops from there. The militants know that the military continent of Kenya for 11 years of its stay in Somalia has not achieved any success and has failed to complete any of the tasks while suffering significant losses. Take a look. And of course, we can see that they have released an official statement. Unfortunately, I don't think I can zoom in close enough to read it. All right, there we go. Kenya crossroads. Of course, this is coming from the Islamic States. So here you go. This is the Islamic State writing. 29th Muharram, 1444, whatever, 27th August of 2022. After a tightly contested election, Kenya today stands at the crossroads. As Kenyans prepare to usher in a new president, they once again have the chance to review their foreign policy decisions and implications that come with those decisions, chiefly their illegitimate invasion of Somalia. Throughout the election campaigns, the presidential candidates deliberately avoided addressing Kenya's deteriorating situation as well as their military invasion of Somalia. Kenyan politicians, it seems, are willing to persist on the path of war in order to fulfill their interests of their Western masters, putting the lives of their citizens at risk in the interests of their country in jeopardy. First of all, this is the Islamic State. I cannot believe how much this sounds like the Russian Federation right now. Like, I just noticed that. Sorry, this is Al-Shabaab, not the Islamic State. It might as well be. They're terrorists. It's Al-Shabaab. Like, we've seen Al-Shabaab do terrible things. Like, they're terrorists. They're Al-Qaeda. They're literally the people who committed 9/11. It's Al-Qaeda. It's Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, same group, two different names. And they sound like the Russians. Kenyan politicians, it seems, are willing to persist upon the path of war in order to fulfill the interests of their Western masters, putting the lives of their citizens at risk in the interests of their country in jeopardy. Chiefly, their illegitimate invasion of Somalia. What in the world? Okay, it's been 11 years since Kenya invaded Somalia. To this day, however, the Kenyan military did not achieve any of their initial goals of the invasion. The Kenyan Defense Forces, KDF, remain besieged in their bases, unable to leave their bunkers, and they are also incapable of conducting any effective military operations against the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen, on the other hand, have increased their retaliatory attacks inside Kenya, carrying out hundreds of targeted strikes or targeted attacks against the Kenyan military installations and personnel. Having failed to secure the country, the Kenyan government resorted to silence in the media in order to hide the grim reality of the war from the Kenyan public and prevent them from asking uncomfortable questions about their illegitimate invasion. Wow, you know what? I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but yeah, that's pretty crazy. I don't know how that settles right. Well, I guess that Russia is a terrorist state, but that's a whole other argument. Now, for those that don't know, we try to remain apolitical and unbiased here, but the fact of the matter is that we have a bias for Ukraine, quite heavily, in fact, based off of the own information that we've reviewed, and it is insane. The Russian Federation is insane. So we do have a very clearly stated bias. I am sorry if that kind of is off-putting to you, but I cannot, in any kind of moral stance, support the Russian Federation in any of their endeavors. While I do understand that it's not the Russian people doing this, and I hate it when people use derogatory terms for Russians, I cannot stand the Russian government and the Russian military. I just cannot. I already had some personal problems with them, considering some of the stuff I saw in Syria, and now with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there's no way that I cannot stay unbiased on that issue. I have to have a bias. I have to have some kind of political view, and it must be in that of favor of Ukraine. So I'm sorry if that is off-putting to you, but that is the facts. Over here, so we have a couple of different things that has happened. This is up in Kobo, so I'm going to have to zoom in here. And that is that TPLF rebels are parading in the streets. A parade of TPLF forces took place in the city of Kobo, which was met by the local residents who remained in the city. Both sides of the conflict involved all forces in the war. The rebels are actively mobilizing children and teenagers for the front, which has caused condemnation among military personnel. It's also reported that the troops of Eritrea again came to the aid of the Ethiopian army. So far, there is no significant evidence of this, but the rebels are already willing to engage in battle with troops of a neighboring country. We can go ahead and take a look here. And some of these images, we saw a little bit of them yesterday as they were going through and they're parading here. But the use of child soldiers within Africa, especially in some of these militia campaigns and civil wars, is quite apparent, but it is quite a problem. It's very common. Unfortunately, I don't think this should be a thing, but unfortunately, in this part of the world, it tends to be. Take a look. So there is the TPLF rebels that are currently parading through the streets of Kobo. And as we jump down here, we see that many Ethiopian soldiers ended up surrendering. Ethiopian army soldiers surrendered en masse to advancing rebels. Many of them report a complete lack of desire to fight and in the fact that they were mobilized. TPLF-linked sources say there are so many prisoners that rebels are releasing some of them due to the inability to feed them. At the moment, the fighting is going on north of the city of Valdea, and it is not clear whether the Ethiopian army will be able to actually hold that front line. And as you can see here, we got some photos of some pretty massive amounts of prisoners of war here.
እንግዲህ የውጭ ጠላትንማ እናንተም እኛም አንድ ላይ ተባብረን ብዙ ነገር እንሰራለን፣ ብዙ ነገር እናደርጋለን። ግን ይሄ ቤተሰቡ ነው ጥሩ አልመጣልንም። እንግዲህ እግዚአብሔር የሞተው ሞቷል፣ ያለን በህይወት ያለን እሱ በቃ ሰላም ይስጠን። እናንተም መማራችሁ ጥሩ ነገር ነው። ሰባዊ ርህራሄ እውነት የእግዚአብሔር ሰው ብትሆኑ ነው እንጂ
So unfortunately I don't speak the local languages, so I can't translate that for you. I don't think we have anyone that can. But basically that's them talking about how they don't want to fight and they're kind of upset that they've been mobilized. As we jump up here into Tripoli, we have a couple of different points. Earlier today, the fighting did continue here in Tripoli, Libya, as fighting has been quite intense over the last few days over issues between the prime minister and the military government in place. Throughout the night, the supporters of Bashaga and Dabiba did not subside in Tripoli. At the moment, it is known that at least 32 people have been killed and 150 people have been wounded during the fighting thus far. 64 families have been evacuated from the area around the fighting. It's also reported that Dabiba's supporters blew up a house of Mustafa Kadur and the deputy chief of intelligence, who is among Bashaga's supporters. Dabiba himself arrived in the part of the city under his control and met with his supporters. But yeah, the fighting is quite intense here in Tripoli. However, it would appear that the fighting has seemed to have halted. Relative calm has been established. The fighting ended in a virtual victory for Dabiba's forces after they occupied a number of military installations and arrested some of the commanders who fought for Bashaga. Dabiba himself ordered an assessment of the damage done to the city and he could compensate for it. Obviously, there is quite an extensive amount of destruction. And at this point, it's pretty evident. JL asks, do you think that the war in Ukraine started a domino effect, or it's just subjective and we just started paying more attention to similar events? That's really hard to say. The world is very globalized at this point. So you have to understand that in this world, we are a lot more interconnected than we used to be. And there are already a lot of fragile situations throughout the world. Libya has been fragile. Egypt is also fragile. The Balkans, which is over, Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, these areas, it's a very fragile situation. Afghanistan, Turkey and Syria, Iraq, Syria and Israel and Palestine, Yemen, Ethiopia. This is stuff that has been ongoing for decades. It's a lot of tensions that have been ongoing for decades and building and building and building and building and building. And much like building a house of cards, there comes a point in which you go to place the last cards on top and it collapses under itself. the thing with Ukraine is that Ukraine is the breadbasket of the world. And while you have other situations, climate change is certainly not something that's Ukraine, and you have all of these horrendous crises that by themselves were already very terrible. The lack of collateral, or the lack of food coming out of Ukraine now as part of a grain crisis, has exacerbated these issues. Ethiopia, much of Ethiopia, the people there, their rations have been cut, humanitarian aid-wise, by upwards of 50%. And in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, where 90% of people require humanitarian aid to survive, there was a time where the World Food Program and the International Committee of the Red Cross and many other organizations they stopped doing shipments there. They didn't have the supplies to do it because of the ongoing war in Ukraine, and therefore everything had to be emergency diverted. It was already a situation between the TPLF rebels and the government forces in the Tigray region. However, it was semi-stable. This exacerbates the problems. There's already a bunch of problems, and now they're not getting fed, which is going to cause more tension, and therefore that kind of finally, the cup finally overflows, and the house of cards starts to crash. There's many issues throughout the world. None of it is directly a domino effect of Ukraine. It's probably not likely that was the final nail in the coffin for Ethiopia either. That wasn't what caused the war. It just happened to be it happened to be a part of the cards. It just happened to be a part of the house of cards. Many of these issues are boiling over as a result of residual effects, but many of them are because of situations that have gone on for decades. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, the situation with Kenya, Syria, the Islamic State, Afghanistan, and the flooding there. That's climate change. That's not part of the war in Ukraine. Now, is there stuff certainly that we can consider a domino effect? Yes, collateral hunger is 100% a domino effect of the country, because of the war in Ukraine. And as a result, for the next, roughly, according to the United Nations, 3 to 5 years, there will be quite a significant issue with food. In Syria alone, since roughly 2000, and I want to say last year, actually. Yes, last year. Since last year, in the country of Syria, food prices have raised by 300%. 300%. That's insane. If you, I believe it was the World Food Program, they put out a short video, and it is that in last year, in September, I believe, of last year, you could get the 1,000 milligrams of sugar, and for the same price now you can get 100 milligrams. And that's the reality of many places in the world right now. Collateral hunger is a thing. Climate change is a thing. These wars have been ongoing for some time. Things like what's ongoing in Africa, with Al-Shabaab and stuff. It's too difficult to, Let's Get Steve says, it's so complicated to look at such a massive problem and sum it up on the fly. There's so many things that occurred to lead up to these situations, each of them independent, each of them complicated within their own right, and each of them, there could be some pretty serious in-depth videos, which I may actually end up doing in the future for you guys to kind of help you understand what's going on and help myself understand too, because I definitely don't know everything. But it just happens, it's not a domino effect, it just happens to be one set of cards on the house of cards, and the house of cards is collapsing. And with that, we end up moving down here into South America. Sorry, I almost missed this spot. Nope, actually, no, I got that. We're all good. Okay, so we move down here into South America, where we see that protests are ongoing here. This is in Argentina. In Argentina, a demonstration in support of left-wing politician and Deputy Prime Minister Cristina Fernández de Kirchner escalated into clashes with police. Fernández de Kirchner is accused of corruption during her presidency, and prosecutors ask for 12 years in prison. According to local media, 7 police officers were injured, 2 protesters were arrested. Fernández de Kirchner later asked her supporters to halt the protests. So quite significant protests ongoing there. We can take a look at some of these.
Vamos, 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 vamos que sale, vamos que sale. Chao la reta, chao.
Está bien, está bien, está bien. Se va solo, se va solo.
Por la duda que se quede, por la duda.
Se va solo también.
Bueno, pero que se viene
No, no puedo porque tengo la moto y atrás. Correla la moto.
Well, that brings up, but that actually finally draws a close as we talk about that last point with all of the rather kind of not so uplifting news, the depressing stuff. Now, every single day we try and find some good points regarding these situations here throughout the world, and we try and counteract that with some uplifting stuff, some interesting stuff, some stuff that you may not know and may not get nearly as heavily reported, to try and end the night on at least some kind of a good note. And the first thing that we have is actually back over here in China, where a very interesting cloud has formed. It was called It's called a mother of pearl cloud, and how it happens is it's a natural phenomenon where, under the right circumstances, it's basically like a rainbow. Sunlight gets dispersed through droplets and ice crystals within a cloud, and it's really, really cool. It's really cool. You can go ahead and take a look at that now. So that is a mother of pearl cloud. That is so cool. That is so cool. It's very beautiful. I love really cool phenomenon like that. It's called a mother of pearl cloud. It's of a natural occurrence, but it has to have under the right circumstances. And then as we jump over here to Portugal, the largest dinosaur skeleton in Europe may have been found here in Portugal. The remains of what could be the largest dinosaur to be found in Europe are being uncovered in a backyard in Pombal, Portugal. The remains are now being studied by an international research team. The Portuguese and Spanish paleontologists working on the site have been unearthing what could be the remains of the largest sauropod dinosaur ever to be found in Europe. It's huge. It's a big boy. This is a big dinosaur. You normally don't get fossils that big. When the rib cage is as big as you are, that's a big one. And so if you guys are interested in that, you can actually go down here where phys.org actually has an entire article on it, and I highly encourage you guys to go read it. Or if you check out in the description, you'll see that our website's down there as well. If you go to our website, go to daily work or our works and daily maps, you can actually go through, and we have all of our maps archived on there for you, so you can go and you can check them out yourselves, including in making sure that everything is, you can go and click on any of these instead of having to try and pause the video and type all of this in for you. You can just go on there and click right on it. And as we jump over here and into South America, once again, this is in an area that's jointly controlled by Argentina and by Chile. And what we see is that the remains of a woman from 800 years ago was found in northwestern Patagonia. A team of researchers affiliated with multiple institutions in Chile and Argentina have found the remains of a woman buried in a canoe approximately 800 years ago. The remains were found at a dig site called Nguyen Antug, which is close to Lake Lacar in the western part of Argentina. The analysis has shown that the woman was between 17 and 25 years old at the time of her death, and the researchers were not able to determine the cause of death. Testing of the woman's bone fragment showed that she was from approximately 1142 AD, which means that she was likely a member of the Mapuche culture, that she lived and died before the Spanish arrival. Prior research has suggested that burying people in a canoe was part of a ritual intended to allow deceased individuals to make a final journey across mystical waters to another land known as Nomalofkin, where they would reside in a place known as the Destination of Souls. And that is kind of a graph of what they have found there for you. A little bit of what they're showing here. Very interesting. And if you would like more information on that, phys.org has that as well as the original article off of journals.plos.org. So if you guys want to check out either of those, it'd be go ahead and feel free to do so. You can find the map on our website. That's actually it for everything inside the world. Quite a bit of interesting stuff happening throughout the world today. And obviously we've had a few technical difficulties. I hope you'll forgive us for the hiccups. We are doing this live, but I hope that you've enjoyed, and if not, just at least learn something. There's a ton of stuff that's been happening throughout the world, and there's a lot of stuff getting ready to come up. There's a lot of talk in the chat I'm seeing tonight regarding what's going on with the Artemis One missions. I am extremely excited to, and I plan on actually trying to watch it live at work if I can sneak it in. So we'll have to see. Yeah, because it's one of the greatest. It's one of the top moments of our lifetimes. I think that going, especially when we actually end up going to the moon with people on board. This is something I missed the first chance to see this. I'm pretty sure I missed all chances to see a mission to the moon in my lifetime, and to be able to get to see it would be amazing. So I can't wait for the Artemis 3 missions. I'll have to settle for Artemis 1, but at least we're going to do a flyby. It's going to be the furthest a man-made object meant to carry people has ever traveled. In fact, they're going to be shooting past the moon by quite a ways before they make that slingshot back to Earth. But in the meantime, hopefully we'll be able to report on that on Tuesday, because as you know, we do take Mondays off. Or if you're new to this channel, we don't do streaming on Mondays. We need to take a mental health day. Because a lot of this stuff is, as you can guess, very depressing over time. So we take a mental health day on Monday. I do some tweets on the stream, whatever, and try and relax a little bit too. I hope that you guys have enjoyed, and hopefully you'll be joining us once again back on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time at 9 p.m. Central. Please be sure to check out the video description below. There's a ton of different organizations down there. And we're never doing super chats on this channel. We're never pushing merchandising. 100% of everything that we do is just going to be for helping people throughout the world. We're doing fundraisers. We're doing charities. We want to do great things for people, and we hope to be able to do that in the future as well. So, please, if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's fine too. Let us know. You can like this video, subscribe, let your friends know about us, post it on social media, whatever you're going to do. Make a subreddit about us. I don't care. Just please help us grow this. The more people that are here, the more impact we will have, and eventually we'll be able to put charities directly onto this stream, which would be awesome, because I want to have one on every single stream we do. I want to raise $1 million through streams just alone for organizations. So please help us achieve that goal if you can. And if you have more organizations, jump on the Discord. Not just because we have a cool community. I don't care if you participate or not. That's up to you. But let a staff member know, whether it's myself or somebody else that's listed as a staff member. Shoot us a link and give us more information there about an organization, especially if they cover an area that we don't right now. We would love to be able to get that vetting process started. And we want to fill all 5,000 characters of our description with nothing but links. So with that, I hope that you guys have enjoyed. I hope you found it at least knowledgeable. Please remember to help us grow this channel, and definitely support the organizations listed below. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I hope that you guys find that safety and security in the near future. I really don't want you being part of any of these points on a map. I really do not. I do not want us to report on you. I really don't. So please be safe. Please make good choices. Please have a wonderful beginning part to your week, a wonderful Monday and Tuesday. And we will once again see you back at 9 p.m. Central Time, 10 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday night for a 48-hour review of news. My name is Paul from the New News, and I hope that you all have a fantastic early part to your week and wonderful rest of your night. Stay safe out there. Bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стояно повноваги, і чудо кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлекло, то для них нема нічого, крім труни. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям плечом, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11, shove it up your wrinkle bomb. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Ідіть нахуй.